Pay attention to 15-year-old Riley Crossman walking through her front door in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, on Tuesday, May 7th, 2019, at exactly 3 p.m. She has just 8 hours left to live, because the one person who should have protected her most is already watching her every move, planning to make sure she never sees another sunrise. Andy McCauley, the 31-year-old man living under the same roof, trusted by her mother, accepted his family, has other plans. And what happens in the darkness of that night will expose a predator who was hiding in plain sight all along. This is the story of one terrifying night that destroyed a family, shattered a community, and revealed that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from strangers on the street. It comes from inside your own home. Tuesday, May 7th, 2019, began like countless other days in Berkeley Springs. The weather was pleasant, temperatures climbing as summer approached. Riley attended her classes at Berkeley Springs High School. Nothing particularly remarkable about her day. She arrived home just after 3 p.m. to find her mother, Chantel, asleep on the sofa. Chantel worked 2 jobs to support the family and wasn't feeling well that day. Riley, being the thoughtful daughter she was, eventually woke her mother so she wouldn't be late for her evening shift. After Chantel left for work, Riley spent the evening with her brothers, her grandmother Debbie, and Andy McCauley. Around 7:30 p.m., after Debbie departed, Riley retreated to her bedroom to FaceTime with Hayden. What should have been a pleasant conversation quickly turned into an argument. Hayden had a school trip to Washington, D.C. scheduled for the following day, and Riley, experiencing typical teenage jealousy, didn't want him getting too friendly with female classmates. The disagreement wasn't serious, just normal relationship turbulence. Hayden eventually fell asleep around 10 p.m., exhausted from preparing for the trip. But what happened next would haunt him forever. At 11:01 p.m., Riley's phone lit up with an outgoing message to Hayden's phone. "Andy's in my room, shh," she wrote, adding urgently, "Don't say anything about it so he can hear everything." 12 minutes passed. 12 minutes during which we can only imagine Riley's growing terror. At 11:13 p.m., her final message appeared on Hayden's screen. "I'm scared, babe." Hayden, sleeping peacefully in preparation for his school trip, wouldn't see these messages until morning. By then, Riley Crossman would be gone. When Chantel returned home from work that night, Riley's bedroom door was closed. Assuming her daughter was either sleeping or still texting with Hayden, she decided not to disturb her. This simple decision, made with the best intentions and respect for her daughter's privacy, would become a source of profound guilt. Nobody in that house knew that Riley was already gone, that something unspeakable had occurred behind that closed door. Wednesday morning, May 8th, arrived with deceptive normalcy. At 5 a.m., Hayden woke for his Washington, D.C. trip and immediately noticed the missed FaceTime call and Riley's disturbing messages from the previous night. Concern gnawed at him, but with his trip departure imminent, he had limited options. Meanwhile, at the Crossman household, Chantel checked Riley's room around 7 a.m. and found it empty. Initially, this didn't trigger alarm bells. Chantel knew about Hayden's class trip and assumed Riley had walked to school early to see him before the buses departed. It seemed like something the love-struck teenager would do. However, certain details didn't align properly. Riley's purse remained in her room. So did her glasses and phone charger, items she never left home without. This was unusual, but not necessarily alarming enough to trigger panic. Everyone went about their business that day, expecting Riley to return home around 3 or 3:30 p.m., as she always did. But when that time came and went, with no sign of Riley, her grandmother grew worried. Chantel tried calling and texting repeatedly. Every call went straight to voicemail. Every text went unanswered. For a teenager who practically lived on her phone, who always responded within minutes, this silence was deafening. Reality began to crystallize in Chantel's mind. She hadn't actually seen Riley the previous night, had she? She'd gone to check on her sometime after 10 p.m., but the closed door had stopped her. She'd respected her daughter's privacy, never actually confirming Riley was in the room. The realization hit like a physical blow. When Chantel informed Andy that Riley was missing, his reaction struck her as strange, but he volunteered to search for the missing girl. Chantel drove to Berkeley Springs High School, just blocks away, hoping for a simple explanation. Instead, she received horrifying confirmation. Riley had never shown up for school that day. When Chantel returned home, Andy left on his bicycle, supposedly to search for Riley. She and her friend Kelly set off to do the same. Hours later, when Chantel arrived back home, she found Andy asleep on the couch instead of actively searching for her missing daughter. Anger, fear, and frustration overwhelmed her. Her maternal instinct screamed that something terrible had happened. If anyone knew Riley's whereabouts, it would be Hayden, but when she finally reached him, he confirmed he hadn't seen, texted, or talked to Riley all day. At that moment, Chantel entered full panic mode. She immediately dialed 911 and reported her daughter missing. Law enforcement's response was swift and serious. While police sometimes move slowly when teenagers disappear, assuming they'll return in a day or two, Riley's case felt different from the start. According to her father, Lance, and everyone who knew her, running away would have been completely out of character. Riley was too thoughtful, too responsible to keep her family worried unnecessarily. Moreover, at just 15 years old, she couldn't even drive. The only logical explanations were that she'd been in some accident, or, far worse, had been taken against her will. Officers immediately began searching around Riley's school and home, questioning family members for any helpful information. They interviewed her friends, and to their surprise, at least one friend revealed that Riley might not have come home because she was afraid of Andy McCauley. This single statement shifted the investigation's focus dramatically. Investigators already knew Andy's background, his dependency issues, his extensive criminal record spanning nearly a decade. He became a person of interest immediately. When officers arrived at the home to question Andy, he appeared helpful and cooperative. He claimed he'd last seen Riley around 9 or 10 p.m. on May 7th when she went to her room. He said he'd gone to sleep and woke around 4 a.m. on May 8th, leaving for his construction job around 5 a.m. His story seemed straightforward, but investigators would soon discover it was riddled with lies. Meanwhile, scores of concerned residents joined the search for Riley. Because kidnappers often transport victims across state lines, the Morgan County Sheriff's Office immediately notified law enforcement agencies in Maryland and Virginia. Federal agencies, including the FBI, ATF, and Department of Homeland Security, joined the investigation, bringing far greater resources and expertise to this perplexing missing persons case. When officers showed Chantel the disturbing text messages Riley had sent to Hayden that night, she speculated that Andy may have entered Riley's room to harm her. Whether this suspicion was based on previous incidents or simply her interpretation of the messages remains unclear, but it added another horrifying dimension to the investigation. Andy was questioned multiple times at the home during the early investigation phase. Officers even showed him Riley's final text messages, asking for his reaction. He maintained his innocence, insisting there was no reason Riley would be afraid to come home. Andy volunteered to take a polygraph test and, since he wasn't under arrest, went to the station voluntarily. However, the results came back inconclusive because he was under the influence of substances at the time. During subsequent questioning by investigators from the Morgan County Sheriff's Office and West Virginia State Police, inconsistencies in Andy's story began emerging like cracks in a dam. He initially claimed he'd been asleep from the night of May 7th until early the following morning, but phone records revealed he'd texted a friend nearly a dozen times around 2 a.m. on May 8th. Confronted with this evidence, Andy changed his story. He admitted leaving home on foot around 2:30 in the morning to acquire substances because he was going into withdrawal and felt horrible. He also maintained he'd gone straight to work around 5 a.m. and spent the entire day at a job site in the Red Hill subdivision. However, Andy's employer told a very different story. The company owner stated that Andy had asked for 3 heavy-duty trash bags that morning, claiming he needed to leave and clean up another job site. When Andy returned 4 or 5 hours later, his boss noticed his shoes were untied and his clothes were disheveled, as if he'd gotten dressed in a hurry. This observation would prove significant. Investigators also obtained CCTV footage showing Andy leaving the job site in his green truck and traveling along multiple roads. Some of these roads didn't make sense if he was simply driving between the 2 job sites he'd claimed to visit. One road in particular caught their attention: Tuscarora Pike. When questioned, Andy initially denied being on Tuscarora Pike that day, but when confronted with the contradictory video evidence, he grudgingly admitted to lying once again. His excuse? He went there to buy substances and didn't want to incriminate himself. This explanation didn't hold up under scrutiny. One of Andy's co-workers told investigators he already had narcotics on him that day and wouldn't have needed to buy more. The timeline was becoming clearer. Andy had spent 4 or 5 hours doing something other than buying substances, and it almost certainly involved Riley's disappearance. Morgan County Sheriff Corporal Luke Shambaugh later testified that Andy had lied about nearly everything and changed his story multiple times. Every officer and investigator involved agreed Andy McCauley was involved in Riley's disappearance. Now they just needed to prove it, and, if it wasn't too late, find Riley alive. When her saliva and DNA were discovered on a pillow in her bedroom, investigators feared the worst. As days dragged by with no sign of the missing teenager, even the most optimistic family members began losing hope. 8 days after Riley vanished, their worst fears were confirmed. On Saturday, May 16, 2019, a body was discovered concealed along the embankment of Tuscarora Pike, approximately 25 miles southeast of Riley's home in Berkeley Springs, the same road Andy had denied traveling, the same road captured on CCTV footage. The body was in such an advanced state of decay that immediate identification was impossible. However, investigators could determine it was a young woman or teenage girl. The victim's t-shirt was bunched up around her neck and shoulders. She wore denim shorts that were disheveled, unfastened, and partially open. Her clothing was displaced abnormally high around her hips and waist, suggesting someone else had dressed her. There was an unidentified chalky white substance on the victim's shoes, and investigators found numerous screws scattered around the site. They felt certain it was Riley, but couldn't notify the parents until positive identification was made. They did, however, tell Andy McCauley. By then, he was already the main person of interest, and investigators wanted to gauge his reaction. When informed about the body discovered near Tuscarora Pike, Andy became noticeably flustered and asked if they knew who it was. Officers said it hadn't been positively identified, and they hadn't notified Riley's parents. Andy replied that he hoped it wasn't Riley, that she was his daughter, and that he loved her like one of his own. The words rang hollow, given what investigators suspected. The following day, dental records confirmed the body was indeed Riley Crossman. Advanced decay prevented the medical examiner from determining an exact cause of death, but it was ruled a homicide. Investigators also learned that the white substance on Riley's shoes was commercial drywall mud, commonly used in construction. Andy couldn't explain why drywall screws identical to those discovered near Riley's body were also in his truck and tool belt. With a mountain of evidence against him, investigators concluded that Andy had entered Riley's room on May 7th, came up behind her while she lay face down on the bed, and asphyxiated her with a pillow. They suspected the motive was predatory, though the medical examiner found no conclusive evidence due to the passage of time. However, Chantel told investigators that Andy could be aggressive when under the influence of substances, lending credence to this theory. Police arrested Andy McCauley on May 16, 2019, charging him with Riley's murder. According to prosecutor Dan James, the tight-knit Morgan County community had never seen anything like this horrific crime. Andy's trial began on September 27, 2021, more than 2 years after he allegedly murdered Riley. The packed, emotionally charged courtroom included Circuit Court Judge Deborah McLaughlin, Riley's parents, friends and relatives, members of the press, law enforcement officials from local, state, and federal agencies, Prosecutor James, the jury, and defendant Andy McCauley with his attorney Andrew Arnold. Everyone expected Andy to plead guilty given the overwhelming evidence against him. When he instead pleaded not guilty, shock rippled through the courtroom. In similar cases, defense attorneys typically urge clients to plead guilty and throw themselves on the court's mercy, or negotiate reduced charges. But Andy chose to fight. State Prosecutor Dan James began by presenting an overview of the horrific crime from beginning to end. In a particularly poignant moment, he rhetorically asked why Riley's shorts and clothing were torn and disheveled. While assault was never definitively proven, this reminder emphasized the heinous nature of the crime. When Chantel took the stand, she provided a sober, nearly emotionless account of the circumstances surrounding her daughter's disappearance. Then, Dr. Piotr Kubajak from the Office of the Medical Examiner testified about Riley's body and the autopsy results. He explained that advanced decay made determining the exact cause of death impossible, but he ruled it a homicide. He noted her unfastened, open shorts, and partially torn clothing. West Virginia State Police Sergeant Sean Wolf testified that Riley's shorts and clothing were displaced much farther than normal, with a portion of her body left in a compromised state. He stated that asphyxiation couldn't be ruled out as the cause of death, though this statement was later stricken from the record because he wasn't qualified to make such a determination. Nevertheless, it painted a vivid and horrifying picture for the jurors. Forensic analysis revealed that the drywall, mud, and screws found with Riley's body matched those in Andy's truck and tool belt. His former boss, Howard Ruark, provided damning testimony. He confirmed that Andy had requested heavy-duty trash bags on May 8th, left the job site for 4 or 5 hours, and returned with untied shoes and disheveled clothes, as if he'd dressed in a hurry. During the week-long trial, prosecutors presented more than 120 pieces of evidence, including CCTV footage of Andy traveling Tuscarora Pike on May 8th in the vicinity where Riley's body was found. During closing arguments, Prosecutor James stressed that the crime was premeditated. He reminded the jury how long it takes for someone to die from asphyxiation, emphasizing that during that time, the killer would have had ample opportunity to stop. As the trial drew to a close, jurors were instructed they could attach mercy to Andy's sentence if they found him guilty of first-degree murder. Without mercy, he would receive life in prison without possibility of parole. With mercy attached, he could become eligible for parole after 15 years, though there was no guarantee of release. Before the jury deliberated on mercy, Riley's father, Lance, took the stand. Through tears, he asked how anyone could summarize their child's life or explain what she meant to them. He described Riley as the type of child you hope to have one day: kind, gentle, loving, and full of life. He noted that Riley would be forever frozen in time, forever 15 years old in their memories. Counsel mentioned 15 years, Lance said, his voice breaking. In 15 years, he may be eligible for parole. She only got 15 years. That's all she had. 15. He asked where the mercy was when Andy walked into Riley's room where she was supposed to feel safe, when he attacked her, when he put her in a concealment and dumped her off the side of the road like refuse. Andy's defense attorneys explained that attaching mercy wasn't a guarantee of parole in 15 years, only that a parole board could review his case then. They asked the jury to leave that important question to a distant future, to another body whose obligation was community safety first. The jury took less than 20 minutes to convict Andy McCauley of first-degree murder, death of a child by a custodian through child abuse, and concealing a body. Unsurprisingly, they voted unanimously not to attach mercy to the verdict. Judge McLaughlin sentenced Andy to life without the possibility of parole on November 4, 2021. Andy remained stoic and refused to make a statement. At trial's end, Riley's mother Chantel, prosecutor James, and numerous officers and investigators who worked the case all expressed disappointment that the death penalty wasn't an option under West Virginia law. Andy McCauley is currently serving his sentence at the Mount Olive Correctional Complex in South Central West Virginia, where he will remain for the rest of his natural life. Riley Crossman's murder represents a profound betrayal of trust. A young girl killed by someone who should have protected her, someone living under the same roof, someone her mother trusted. Her final moments remain known only to her killer, but her last text messages reveal her terror. This case serves as a tragic reminder that danger sometimes comes not from strangers, but from those closest to home. Riley's memory lives on through her family, friends, and a community that will never forget the bright 15-year-old girl whose life was stolen far too soon.